Okay, we are live at the Prospects Weekly Roundup, weekly show that we do. Alas, my boss David Dayan is still unbelievably on vacation, and so you are stuck with me once again. But luckily, we have a fresh face. We have Whitney Wimbish, who is our staff writer who just started this week, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, so we're just throwing her into the deep end. She has to deal with me ranting and raving for an hour. But can you introduce listeners to yourself? Where do you come from? What's your story?
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks so much for having me on today. I've been a journalist my whole career. Most recently, I spent about 17 years at the Financial Times in their newsletter division, covering financial regulation, our so-called retirement system, things of that nature. And before that, I was at the Cambodia Daily in Phnom Penh and at the Herald News in New Jersey. And there, on those two outlets, I covered local politics, um, all things that were going on in each of those towns.
Lovely, yeah. So if I make any humiliating mistakes regarding financial regulation or retirement policy, you'll be there to, catch me in the act.
I'll be there pre-mistake to say, hey, here's a Wikipedia article to read.
Cooper, you shut your mouth.
No.
Um, but yeah, so the first thing I wanted to bring up, you have a story with Emma Jansen on our site that's about this whole no taxes on tips. This is one of those things that just seem to kind of sizzle out of Trump's brain pan for some reason, and actually Kamala Harris even picked it up. Um, and I think it maybe sounds. I mean, if you make a lot of money on tips, it's like, well, no taxes on that. That sounds pretty nice. I guess that's more money for me, right? But, as you get into in the piece, there's a lot more to it than that, especially when you take into account the rest of this big, beautiful monstrosity that has recently passed the House and is at the Senate. So, can you get into the details of that?
Yeah, sure. So Emma and I found that this is just a pretty flashy, eye-catching type of proposal that is really not going to help that many people. But it is something that lawmakers can use to score points because it's very memorable. It has to do with service workers who you talk to, when you get your coffee. But when we looked at the numbers and talked to economists, it's really, like I said, not going to help that many people. And it is certainly not going to outweigh the damage that other parts of the House spending bill are going to cause to workers. There's two bills. One was passed by the Senate earlier this week, and the other one was passed in the Republican spending bill package. They differ in a couple critical ways. Uh, One is that in the House version, in order to claim this benefit, you would have to have a social security number. And if you're married, your spouse would also have to have a social security number. So that's really another kind of punishment for undocumented workers who really compose a pretty sizable chunk of the service worker industry. And the House proposal would also set a limit on how long the benefit would last. It would only last a couple years. Both of them are organized as tax deductions, where you would be able to claim as a deduction at the end of the year a certain chunk of your taxes. I think it was more than $20,000, a little bit. Um, and so it would be retroactive. You'd get that money back. But when Emma and I talked to researchers and economists, what we've heard was that the number of people who are paying taxes on their tips, on their income at all, is really small among people who make tipped income. So right out the gate, the bill's not going to apply to a bunch of people. And the other thing we heard was that it is in no way going to offset the loss of Medicaid. It's not going to offset the loss suffered by um, money that you're going to have to pay just to buy things because tariffs are going to make everything much more expensive. And so it's really kind of a band-aid for a cost of living crisis that's helping or that's hurting um, working and middle class folks. The union members who we spoke with and the service workers who are in the restaurant and other tipped industries were saying that they kind of felt like this was a cynical way to use them to score political points. It's not really going to help them. And of course, they welcome not having to pay taxes on tips, but they were kind of like, this is a distraction from the fact that our standard of living is really being harmed by these massive cuts to federal programs.
Yeah, I mean, you can make a comparison to European countries where tipping culture is much less aggressive. You know, the percentage is expected percentage is lower or even nothing in some places. You know, a lot of times workers will regard tipping culture as kind of an affront to like social solidarity. The idea that you have to bow and scrape before the customer to get little bribes throughout the day is really not great for kind of like on, you know, grounds of self-respect and so on.
No,
And
totally. And that was something that workers told myself and Emma, where they were talking about how they disagree with the whole practice of tipping. They,
yeah.
their thoughts are that it is a mechanism that reinforces a really ugly dynamic between people. It reinforces, um, racist behavior. It is not something that people are a big fan of. It's also variable over the course of the year. So, service workers who see a lot of traffic to their restaurant during the summer, or people who are in a resort town, will see a lot of tips for part of the year and then nothing the rest of the year. That's not a good way to structure your financial life because you can't plan long term. Um, the preference that folks had was that lawmakers raise the minimum wage, but that would cost a lot more, and it would also alienate industry. Um, one of the workers I spoke with said that a really good rule of thumb is if you see a policy being championed by both Trump and the restaurant agency, all of your red flags should be just flying in the wind.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also just a very typical American sort of you know, self long-term self-harming ideology of saying that, well, we need to cut taxes on income, you know, so that people have more money, and not taking into account the idea that taxes are supposed to, you know, fund services. Like if you had higher wages, you know, you pay more payroll tax, but you know, you get something for that. You shore up Social Security as it is today, and then when you're retired, you get a larger Social Security benefit because your income history will be higher. And yeah, so you know, like this seems to be a very difficult concept for Americans to accept. The fact that taxes are not just a taking, you know, from the pre-political economy, that in fact they're supposed to fund public services that everyone, including yourself, benefits from. And that's why European countries are totally happy to have, you know, I believe in Sweden, they have a 30% payroll tax. But yeah, you know, then that funds all the stuff that in America you have to pay for out of pocket. You know, your child care, you know, pre-K, health insurance, and a lot of your retirement as well. And, you know,
Totally. One
perfect.
of the things that we didn't get too into in the story, that kind of gets into the psychology of tipping, was that workers and economists alike told us that having no tax on tips be in the public imagination has the really strong potential to make people tip less. There's this idea that a tip is sort of this extra thing on top of a decent salary, on top of enough money to live on. And that's not the case because tipped workers make, in the majority of states, um, less than 10 bucks. The federal tipped minimum wage is $2.13, I think. And There
Jeez.
are a few states that have put stronger, bigger minimums in place, like Nevada is one of them. But the range that we found of folks who are just making less than $10 an hour, I think that applied to more than half of all of the states. So that combined with this just lack of knowledge from people coming in to buy a coffee, workers were saying that they expect just resentment to just go up among customers to be like, why, I'm not even getting table service and I have to tip you 20% and you're not even going to like have to pay taxes on that. Um, they the feeling that folks expressed to us was that that's just going to be bad in the long run. It's going to make people angry and kind of reinforce the idea that there is this class of people who just get a bunch of benefits and they are just sponging off of everybody, which isn't the case.
Yeah, yeah. Reinforce that dynamic of, sort of hierarchy between customer and server. Yeah, not, yeah. A lot of people don't realize that this is to have a minimum wage of like $2. I mean, it's absurd.
No, I'm
Um,
nervous that I have the wrong figure, so I'm going to quickly look it up so no one shouts at me later.
Well,
Um,
it's dramatically less than I know that for a fact that there is a carve out, and this is part of the whole negotiation and special interest lobbying, and it effectively made tips like a necessary part of wages. It's not a little bonus, as people tend to assume. Um, yeah, people rely on it. They need it to meet their daily. Did you figure that out?
yes, I was right. It's 213.
213. Yeah,
Yep,
whopping.
213 an hour.
When's the
Not
last
great.
time you bought something that cost 213 or less? Anyway, yeah, I guess we could move on. Um,
I enough about me. How about you? I am really curious about what you made of Trump's meeting with the South African president, given that you have spent significant time in South Africa.
yeah, so viewers slash listeners may not know that I lived in South Africa. I was a Peace Corps volunteer there from 2009 to 2011. Um, and I was a teacher. I was not a very good teacher, but the South African education system is a shambles in many parts of the country. Uh, but I mean, things have changed quite a bit. A lot of them for the worse in the intervening years. But I had a pretty direct experience because I lived way out in the middle of nowhere in Northern Cape Province, in the part of the former homeland. The way that apartheid worked, the sort of grand apartheid was you had these little Bantu stands that were supposedly like the democratically legitimate way of having your apartheid work, where you had, the South Africa as the country, and then all of these little bits of it that were usually like the worst, least valuable pieces of property that were reserved. They were the legitimate homeland for the black tribes, and that way the apartheid government could pretend like they weren't, oppressing people. Um, and I was out there like in my village. I was the only white person, and I took public transport everywhere. I hitchhiked everywhere. I was never victimized by crime except once when somebody stole a pair of shoes that I had recently bought. Um,
Terrifying.
yeah, not great. You don't like to be robbed, but it wasn't a huge deal at the end of the day. And yeah, so this meeting, where you have Trump and he had this like sizzle reel of South African like propaganda, or a lot of it wasn't even from South Africa, in fact. It's just like right-wing propaganda claiming that there's a genocide going on against white people, particularly farmers over there. And yeah, Trump said death, death, death. He's waving around these articles. And one of them, purporting to describe white farmers being killed was actually from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's just classic Trump. Um, and yeah, the poor guy Cyril Ramaphosa, who he was like a lot of this South African leadership to this day, he was an anti-apartheid activist. He like worked closely with Nelson Mandela, and he had to just sit there and take it, you know, listening to this absolutely preposterous set of lies about white South Africans being targeted. Um, and it is the case that South Africa has a horrible crime problem, really, really bad. The murder rate is like 60 something the last time I checked per 100,000, which is on the order of 10 times higher than the United States, which itself has a very high murder rate compared to like Europe. I think Norway has a murder rate of about 1.5. But it's just categorically false to say that this is, some sort of like direct targeting of white South Africans. Some of them are killed in crimes, but if you look at the statistics, they're actually underrepresented in the murder data. Uh, you know, Almost all of it is black people killing other black people in the townships. Again, that's part of the former apartheid system. We had these segregated ghettos where black workers would be stuffed. The most famous one is Soweto, which stands for Southwest Townships. It's right outside of Johannesburg. These places are still very poor. There's lots of crime, and that's just the typical dynamic in a very unequal society. But it was interesting to see some of the even like right-wing Afrikaner lobbying groups were saying like, look, this is even though they would some of them that would sort of trump up like every time a white farmer was killed in classic right-wing fashion. They're like, look, it's not a genocide. Like what are you talking about? We live here, and we drive around, and it's not like Rwanda in 1994 or anything. And yeah, just I think Ramaphosa said, that I'm sorry that I don't have a plane to offer you. And it just so the dynamics of these poor people like Zelensky and now Ramaphosa, they have to come to Trump on bended knee and try to get him to stop like pointlessly imposing tariffs on all their products. And in fact, a sort of irony here is that Trump brought with him one of his, or sorry, Ramaphosa brought with him one of his white ministers that he has in his cabinet. He has 8 white ministers in his cabinet because the African National Congress recently lost the last election. They didn't get an outright majority for the first time since the end of apartheid. And so the agriculture minister is a white dude. And the agricultural sector is heavily white. That's a legacy of apartheid. White people owned almost all the land. Now they've since, black people have taken up about a fifth of that, but all the big, really productive and profitable farms are still owned by white people, or almost all of them. And they're getting hurt bad by the tariffs on South Africa because that's one of their principal exports to the United States is food. And so the conservative white people are like, "Come on, Trump. We most of them don't want to leave South Africa. It's their home. That's part of the whole apartheid settlement. It was a rainbow nation. It's for everybody, despite all the problems. And Trump is just, gravely harming white South Africans who want to stay where they are, stay where they were born and grew up, and continue to live their lives by, choking off one of their most profitable export markets. And yeah, I mean, it's sick. It's depraved and senseless to a degree that is difficult to describe.
Ryan, could you talk a minute about what you make of this designation of refugee for these white South Africans who have, come to the US, and how that fits into everything that's going on with with Trump's racist policy of just mass deportations?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would call it a PR stunt, like they got like 49 of these people that I'm sure there's some, there's always some white South Africans who would want to come here. There's a fair number, Charlize Theron, is a Afrikaner. And so yeah, this is just like a sort of fig leaf to pretend as if like this is the real racial injustice, while at the same time Trump carries out a massively racist campaign of mass deportations against like basically any brown person that they can find. Um, and so yeah, I mean it's preposterous on a level that you sort of struggle to hang a word on. Um, but again, like I think the Chamber of Commerce, they like circulated a petition or something. They tried to get a list of people who might be interested in South Africa, white South Africans who would be interested in emigrating. And that's just like, just sign indicating some desire. And they got about 65,000 people they claim. Well, there's like 4.5 million white people in South Africa. This is a tiny fraction of the total. And it's just not the case that, this is what white South Africans are crying out for. I think if anything, they would want U.S. assistance with dealing with some of their horribly entrenched corruption and economic development problems. South Africa has had a unemployment rate, I think, above 30% for the last decade, and some pretty serious inflation, other problems. And they're really kind of struggling to like make it to middle income status, basically stagnant economy for the last decade too. And some of their most productive sectors are just like mining, resource, raw material, export. And that's not really, what you want to be doing forever, because for one thing, like they have tons of platinum, but it won't last forever. And so it tends to indicate the total unseriousness of this approach, even for the, white South Africans. It's ridiculous.
I think your characterization of this being a PR stunt is kind of it fits in with this overall theme that we've seen in the House spending bill of this rhetoric around, oh, this is going to help the working class, and then it's actually just giveaway to industry after giveaway, cut after cut. One of the things we wanted to talk about was just the other things in the bill that are just bananas. Um, do you want to
Yeah.
kick that off a little bit?
Sure, sure. I mean, the broad strokes, as we were talking about last week, is you'd have a massive cut to aid to the working class and poor, Medicaid and food stamps, several $100 billion in that area. According to the Congressional Budget Office, by 2034, that would be 10.3 million people kicked off of Medicaid. Um, food stamps down by several hundred billion. And the purpose of it is to, cut taxes on the rich, to extend the Trump tax cuts, and in fact add some more, which we could talk about in a minute. The I was just reading a impact, analysis breaking down who benefits from the tax cuts specifically, and the bottom fifth of households would get 1% of the benefits. The top fifth would get 67% of the benefits, and within that group, the top 1%, the top hundredth of households would get 24% of the benefits, just in terms of dollars. And that, it's just the combine that with the custom Medicaid and SNAP, and you're looking at, basically an 11% decrease in after-tax income for the bottom fifth, and several percent increase for the top fifth. I don't have that figure right in front of me, but taking from the poor to give to the rich, the reverse Robin Hood agenda,
Hmm.
and all this stuff about rooting out waste and fraud and Medicaid and whatnot is all a complete sham. It's just to kick people off the program, to take their resources away from them so that rich people like Elon Musk can have even more.
Hmm.
Um, and that's the broad strokes of it. But, and it's now passed the House. I almost didn't think it would happen, but it did. There was all these conflicts between, for instance, red states that depend heavily on Medicaid. It's usually the biggest insurer in all these four districts that are deep red. And several House Republicans, they sent out a letter saying, "Don't cut Medicaid," and then they all folded.
Yeah,
And
James Barata had a great story about that,
yeah,
and kind of got into, basically the kickbacks that these guys are going to get because of, let's see, because of a tax break
yeah,
for
they
them.
Yeah, there's a extending the qualified business income deduction, I think it's called, and then also making it bigger. So it was 20%, now it's 23%. If you have a sort of a pass-through, LLC that you own, you can just take 20%. And now if this becomes law, 23%. And all of these Republicans, five of them that Jared identified, or sorry, six of them, they all have income of this sort that they declared in their disclosure forms. And this is a pattern we've seen before in Republican bills, where it's not even some lobbying group that comes to say, "Oh, give us a benefit, give us a carve out a loophole in this thing." They're just voting to cut their own taxes. It's just cutting out the middleman, I guess you could say, uh, because as a rule, lawmakers tend to be wealthy and have lots of these sort of special types of income that ordinary people don't.
Yeah, it's a big club. The One of the things that seems like is so blatant in this thing is just the big wet kiss to artificial intelligence companies. There's just instance after instance um, helping these guys out. So there's, that provision that would bar states and municipalities from passing any AI regulation or enforcing any AI regulation. And that's something that different folks I've spoken with for a story next week, have said is really troubling because states have been regulating the use of AI. And their expectation is that those are all unenforceable or would be unenforceable if this bill was ratified as it is. Um, there's also a concern about how enforceable AI provisions in collectively bargained agreements would be if this thing passed. So I, I gather there's this sense of just having AI shoved down our throats without really any recourse through through regulation at any level, which is upsetting and not good at all because I have yet to find someone who is really, really excited about AI outside of, say, um, the sciences in a few ways, and maybe like advanced spell check.
Yeah, yeah. You could name a number of, genuinely useful or at least genuinely interesting things. Like an AI model is kind of a wild artifact that I think is sort of interesting to ponder. But you look at what is, I think, developing the most common use case for these sorts of things, especially as a video mimicry and being able to like face swap people in. It's going to be scams, fraud, um, non-consensual, like revenge porn, and child porn or child sexual abuse material, as people's call it.
Mhm.
And just like some of the most horrible crimes that are in sort of the federal, government and in states and localities, and the idea that you can't regulate apparently any of that stuff is crazy. It's crazy.
It's also a job killer. And I think
Yeah.
that, one of the things that seems like it is just perpetually forgotten um, in in public the public understanding of the tech industry is that every single time the tech industry comes in and says, "Hey, we have this great new product," and P.S., it is really cheap or even free, what that does is it undercuts an existing thing that already serves the same purpose. Um, Powerful interests incorporate it into their everyday business model. And then once the original service has died because they've been undercut so severely, that's when the tech industry ramps up their prices. So it happens over and over again. And it is baffling to me why it doesn't seem like that's a factor that gets kind of put into the long-term assessment of what will happen if we incorporate some of these tools into our business. But I expect that that will happen in all of the industries that, are incorporating AI into producing text. Um, in our own industry, there are news outlets that want to, have AI write certain things, and it's so far just been just a complete disaster. But what that's going to do is take work away from actual human beings, um, give it to a robot. And then it's also going to give the tech industry a substantial amount of power to then say, oh, okay, now we're going to charge you, uh, you know, an exorbitant amount of money every month to continue your subscription to this. We
Yeah.
just have seen that over and over again. Um, the other things that I noticed in the spending bill that relate to AI have to do with incorporating AI more thoroughly into the military. So there are a couple lines that have to do with incorporating artificial intelligence tools into the Navy and into autonomous, what I'm not an expert in this, but it's like autonomous weapon systems, unmanned autonomous weapon systems. That to me is, my first thought is like that will kill a lot of people, but it's also, going to just deliver a lot of tax dollars to some of these um, tech and defense companies, uh, which I think is oh, it's kind of gross. I don't like it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's apparently quite a bit of this happening in Ukraine, self-guiding missiles and kamikaze drones they call them. It's a sort of like steered uh um little plane with a bomb on it that you crash into a tank, and if you lose your connection, then there's like a little AI system that can still steer it even though it's lost the connection. And yeah, a good question from Lauren in the chat. What happens when the AI weapon system commits a war crime? What if they blow up a hospital by accident? That's unclear. And you could imagine this being a sort of laundering of responsibility, where you could do this intentionally or just evade responsibility for doing it by accident. Oh, we didn't do it. It was the computer. And yeah, I think that tends to demonstrate the problems here. And
There's
uh,
a
and go ahead.
no, no, please continue.
Oh, I just want to make one further point, on this question of no regulation. I could easily imagine a system where that actually works out worse for the AI companies. Because the big hotness now is agentic AI, like an actual sort of semi-sentient robot that you can go out and tell it to do tasks. Go, make a restaurant reservation for me, something like that. And if that, you know, little agent has to be sent out into the wild with your bank account details into a world that's absolutely swarming with other AI agents that are all trying to steal your, payment information, setting up fake websites and stuff like that. Nobody's going to use this stuff, even if it works, which is very much an open question. But I think that any sort of market that is just absolutely infested with criminals is never going to get broad legitimacy. Everyone's going to be like, nope, I'm going to drive to the place by myself and I'm
I
going to talk to the actual person.
I hear what you're saying, but like am I it seems to me like even if we all acknowledge that something is not legitimate, the government still has a massive amount of power to um, force it into our lives anyway. Like, and this is my segue, like cryptocurrency, which I wanted to ask you about, and the story that you wrote. But maybe before that, I wanted to flag this question from a person in the audience. It seems
Yeah.
they have a procedural question. Can the Senate or some mechanism there stop the murder bill or slow it down? We talked months ago here about the fact that the 2017 tax cut expires in September at the end of the current fiscal year. Is re-upping inevitable?
No, it's not. So, this is a reconciliation bill, so it only needs 50 votes. Republicans have 53. Um, but, it's already being stalled. There's a lot of things that a lot of items in there that Republican senators are pretty iffy about. There are some, fair number of swing state senators that, don't want to see like hundreds of thousands of their constituents lose Medicaid possibly. Yeah, there are various procedural things that you could do to just slow down the Senate. And I would hope that Democrats will exploit that deny unanimous consent. That's the big one because a lot of the Senate business relies on unanimous consent for procedural matters. And so if you just have somebody just constantly forcing you to go through the actual votes and stuff, you can eat up days and days of floor time. Um, but at the end of the day, it's up to whether or not Republican senators balk or sufficient pressure can be placed on enough of them. You just need four to, get short of a majority. That's what happened to the bill in the when Trump tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act. You remember that in 2017? John McCain famously thumbs down. Um, and this is way, way, way worse than that bill. So there's a possibility there. I would kind of expect for them to just like cut it back a bit, remove some of the most egregious stuff and then pass something else. That might not make it through the House, but yeah, it's more or less in their hands. They have the votes if they want to. And so, if you live in one of those states, you can try giving your senator a call. It's worth a shot. Oh, one
Right.
more question real quick from Jared. Any comments on its industrial policy? Jesse Jenkins previewed a report stating the bill's inevitable greenhouse gas increases. Yeah, that's another important aspect of it. It's basically mostly a full repeal of Biden's, Inflation Reduction Act, this whole climate policy. The tax credits for EVs are phased out at the end of this year, the end of transferability, which makes these green energy tax credits so much more valuable. That's going away. Other ones are being phased out much earlier than they would, and they're also having huge restrictions placed on how they can be used. And I would say, yeah, to the Jesse Jenkins' point, the result will be a dramatic increase in carbon emissions relative to where they would have gone, and also a dramatic decrease in American growth and innovation. It's like this stuff is going to power the economy of the 21st century. It's all going to be EVs and green energy and green industry. That's where China's going faster than anybody else. That's where Europe's going. And this is going to turn the US, it won't stop the green energy transition, but it'll set it back dramatically. And it'll turn, the US into a backwater for, funding Saudi Arabia. It will be the only place that they can sell their oil for the most part. So that's not great. Yeah. Less prosperity, more emissions. Um,
Also more cryptocurrency, right?
yeah,
Can
we
you
love
talk?
it.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the story that you wrote and what's up with these Democrats that voted for the so-called Genius Act?
Yeah, exceptionally well-named bill. So this is a stable coin bill. It's not the only one that's before Congress at the moment, but this was the big one that just passed the Senate. Passed it by 66 votes. So that's even they could potentially override a veto almost. Um, and yeah, it does a number of things. Most important, well, most obviously, it basically greenlights Trump's crypto corruption. He has his own stable coin that he is, uh, running himself, and the investment firm in Abu Dhabi said they were going to buy the crypto trading platform Binance using Trump's stablecoin for $2 billion. I mean, it's it's just ridiculously corrupt. It's like you just take every corruption scandal, from the Credit Mobilier to Teapot Dome to the Keating Five and multiply it by 10,000. This is basically what's happening. Um, I think maybe more importantly, hard to sort of rate these things, but it would also allow stablecoins into the financial system. It would allow stablecoins to trade domestically, and in a stipulation that was added over the weekend, it would allow stablecoins that are not in compliance with American laws regarding like money laundering and terrorism to still circulate domestically, which I mean, it hard to know even what to say about this. But there's estimates that this would allow this it would basically inflate the size of the stablecoin market by tenfold, up to $2 trillion. And these things are already one of the currencies of choice for, criminals of all sorts, human traffickers, drug cartels, terrorists, because it's very easy to obscure your identity and make payments to people outside of the normal financial system without having to follow American regulations about know your customer and other things like that. Basically, it's like reminds me of that. There was a scandal some years ago about HSBC, the bank, the Scottish bank, right? That they had specially designed windows so that drug cartels could stick like a huge brick of cash right through it, and that just so that they could profit off of drug trafficking. And they got fined like $2 billion or something back during the Obama years. This is basically like legalizing that. Just saying that like here's your specific dimensions that you have to make your drug cartel cash brick opening. Um, and it's going to destabilize the financial system terribly because all this stuff it's just a wild west out there. You try to look up the stable coin, so stable coins, by the way, are crypto coins that are supposedly pegged to the US dollar and they're supposedly backed by, one to one with real assets. And the problem with that, A, is if you look at the balance sheets, such that you can even see them, a lot of them are totally obscure and not, disclosed at all. You find just incredibly sketchy piles of junk, like Chinese real estate investments and other types of commercial paper out in God knows where. And the second thing is that even if you do have one-to-one, backing for your stablecoin, there is still an inherent risk of a run because, a lot of this stuff is in fairly illiquid securities. And so if there were to be a panic, you'd have to do a fire sale and you wouldn't get all of your money out and the thing would go bankrupt. And that actually brings to another change in this bill, which is how it deals with stablecoin bankruptcies. And what it would do is it would put the priority in the bankruptcy system to stablecoin investors over everything. And that creates a lot of problems. So number one, in a bankruptcy proceeding, the first thing you have to do is pay some professionals to sort through the mess, to figure out, what everything is and what it's worth. And if you can't pay them, you can't even really have a bankruptcy. But more importantly, um, if say a bank is a custodian of some crypto stablecoin assets and that bank goes bankrupt, then stablecoin investors are rated ahead of depositors. And that means that the let's see, the Georgetown law professor Adam Levitin wrote this up. And so if you had this bankruptcy, so the cash depositors would still be bailed out by the FTC, but all this is, or sorry, the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. But all of this is still funded through the FDIC's insurance fund. And so, that's paid for by banks. They have to pay into that to protect against the risk of bankruptcy. And so at the end of the day, Levitin says, quote, in other words, the Genius Act is subsidizing stablecoin issuance on the back of bank deposits. And I mean, just the idea of doing this, it's just, it's crazy. It's crazy. This is like, this is orders of magnitude worse than any of the financial deregulation packages that passed under Clinton and George W. Bush. I mean, we are laying up tinder for a big crash in the future.
So Ryan, this act purports to spell out what a regulatory system would be for stable coins, and cryptocurrency regulation it's just been this thing that has uh, been caught in this struggle between the Securities and Exchange Commission and the CFTC over who's going to regulate it. Is it a security? Is it a commodity? And so with this act, is there any clarity around what regulation would look like and who the regulator would be?
There's a different bill that is currently in the House. We have some reporting on this from the Revolving Door Project, and the attempt is to move it to the CFTC because that's a weaker and I think more importantly, much less well-funded regulator. One Republican commissioner, by the way, has announced her departure to go work for a crypto lobbying firm before she even quit. So she's still
Oh,
there until the end of May, but is officially, formally going to go work for this fund. Um, the Democratic commissioners might quit, and that could potentially leave the CFTC in charge of one person. I forget his name, but he used to work for Mark Andreessen's Andreessen Horowitz Venture Capital Fund, which is heavily invested in cryptocurrency. And so you could really have just a single fox in the um, hen house. And yeah, you. And on the one last thing, uh, obviously to get to 66 votes, there were a bunch of Democrats who voted for this thing. 16 of them. And despite it being a horrible turd, if I can use that word on YouTube, and the reason is just money. The crypto industry spent hundreds of millions of dollars in 2024. They probably successfully were the ones that made the difference in Ohio, getting rid of Sherrod Brown, who was skeptical of crypto. They helped Adam Schiff defeat Katie Porter in California. And so these, despite the fact that the whole crypto ecosystem almost imploded in 2022, 3 years ago, they're like, well, yeah, we got to give this industry a huge handout. They wrote this bill for us and we're going to vote for it because, they bought these senators over the counter.
the more this stuff gets embedded into our daily life, the more likely it is that we're the ones who are going to have to bail them out
Oh yeah.
when things go when things go south.
I think this is one of the more or less explicit intentions of the crypto bill that when there is a crash, it'll be too big to fail.
Mhm.
And so they'll get, a huge taxpayer bailout, just like what happened at Wall Street in 2008.
No, but how
Um,
will we pay for it?
Good question.
Hmm.
Yeah, a lot of borrowing, presumably. Um, but that's the state of things at the moment. And, it really speaks to how both the incredible corruption unleashed by the Citizens United decision back in 2010 and the fact that, crypto has gotten such a light touch. You look at this stuff and it's all almost by any reasonable reading of the relevant statutes, all this stuff is unregulated security of one brand or another, and they
Mhm.
haven't been subjected to serious oversight from the SEC or others. I mean, the Biden administration did bring a bunch of lawsuits and challenged these companies to, comply with all the relevant regulations. And I think, if you were to just seriously say, what is this stuff? And how does it apply to existing law? The result would be banning crypto entirely. It would all be unregulated securities that can't and don't and can't comply with the law. But instead, we're giving them a brand new carve out so that we can have a brief speculative frenzy followed by a giant crash.
Yeah. So you list in your story the 16 Democrats who voted for this, including um, Mr. 25-hour uh, speech maker Cory Booker.
Yep.
And then we've got Kristen Gillibrand, Adam Schiff, and a bunch of other folks. Can you talk a little bit about what you expect or whether you expect this is the kind of issue that could rally people around to primary these guys?
It's a
Or
possibility. That's what I encourage in my article. I think that this will probably fly under the radar for the moment. It's a very technical piece of legislation. A lot of people don't pay attention to crypto that much. But I do think that if this touches off a crash in the relatively, near term, I think it could be a major albatross around the necks of these people. And, you know, I think it also tends to suggest that the extent to which an industry being able to produce lots of profits, quote unquote, is it just inherently legitimizes people, and they just say, well, it's a big corporate office, and they got lots of money, and they're writing big campaign checks to me, therefore it's good. Uh, yeah, Cory Booker, 25-hour speech. He was also the guy, if you recall, if you're an old head, back in 2012 when Barack Obama was going scorched earth on Bain Capital with frankly kind of Trumpy sounding ads about how, Mitt Romney at Bain Capital was the assassin of Missouri steel factories. These old white guys and ads being like, they sucked the life out of us. They killed all our jobs. Cory Booker went on Meet the Press and he complained. He was like, I don't think we need to be so mean to Bain Capital. Could you please, these people give, he didn't say this exactly, but it was like, Bain Capital is a major donor to him and to the politicians of New Jersey, which is fantastically corrupt in both parties. That's Robert Menendez. Remember him, Mr. Gold Bars,
yeah,
um, who's going to jail. Um, and yeah, so that's the that's the state of the Democratic Party in many states. Uh, but
not great, like you said. What else do you think is in the murder bill that deserves some attention that isn't getting much attention? It seems like it is just one tax shelter, one handout after another. There's a section in there, for example, that creates a tax shelter for stockholders
oh yeah,
if they donate their stock to a private school, they'll make more money that way than if they just sold the stock.
yeah. That I was actually just going to ask you about that. How does that work?
I'm not that kind of a doctor. I think we have to wait for Bob's story to come out on that to really understand how it works. To me, it seems like I don't know, a legal practice, but
Yeah,
everything
you would
is
think.
upside down now.
But I mean, that is of a piece with the general attack of Republicans on public education in general.
Yeah.
And there's all of these at the state level, a number of Republican states have allowed private schools to basically get dip their beaks into the public school funding pot.
Mhm.
And the result of that is that because most private schools are expensive and rich parents pay private tuition, the result is that they just drain off a big chunk of the public school funding. And so there's a massive budget hole open for all of the remaining public schools. Um, because rich people are basically collecting huge subsidies that they otherwise would have paid in tuition
Mhm.
privately. And these schools aren't even very good. You look at the test scores, they're consistently as good or worse than the comparable public schools. They go the private wealthy parents send their children there either for religious reasons or ideological reasons or racist reasons to stay out of more diverse public schools. But yeah, I would not be surprised if there's like one more way to funnel resources to right-wing academies to train up the next generation of Brett Kavanaughs.
Yeah, totally. And they even take it a step further. They proposed in this spending bill that expenses related to homeschool be treated as qualified higher education expenses for 529 accounts, which is also just a way to take take the public good of public education away from kids. This whole thing really just sells out, um, future generations. It's like you said, not great.
Yeah, a general attack on any sort of social solidarity or public
Hmm.
good, and the yeah. Homeschooling is not always terrible, but you look at how it works across most of the country, and it's like almost totally unregulated, and a large, large percentage of the people doing it are crazy reactionaries who are not giving their children a reasonable education, and are not following any kind of, standard that's up to the public school curriculum level. A lot of times you get parents just putting their kids to work,
Oh,
and it's really pretty disgusting. Um, it is,
yeah.
I'm reminded of Finland, which has some of the best test scores in the world, and that happened somewhat by accident because what they tried to do was to create the most equal possible educational experience for everyone, to get rid of all, any carve-outs for wealthy people, private schools, etc. And the result was a school that was a much higher quality at the end of the day.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway, in our last couple of minutes here, do you have any more stories coming up for the prospect?
I
Anything in the hopper?
I do. I have a couple stories that I'm excited about for next week. One is about a pilot program that is included in the spending bill, specifically for the poultry industry, basically to help them in situations where they are affected by um, climate disasters. And then another thing that I am looking at for next week is just what this ban on AI regulation at the state level would mean for these laws that are already in effect, especially for autonomous cars, because the
God.
autonomous cars are run on AI, and safe road advocates are saying, that they expect that this law would make it impossible for states um, to say whether or not these personless driver cars can drive around and accidentally just kill people now and then. There's no federal regulation on this type of vehicle, and so the worry is that it'll just kind of repeal these laws that are on the books. California has a strong set of laws, and then replace them with nothing. And folks are saying that, the reason that the House put this in their bill is because autonomous vehicle companies have spent a ton of money on research and development, and now they need to start, you know, pushing those profits up so they can make it back. So, they'll do that, and if a few people die in the process, then that will be fine with them.
Well, I certainly look forward to the future of a Elon Musk Tesla killdozer on every street. That's
Oh
just
my
run with
God.
cameras only and no LiDAR, just running over pedestrians and sidewalks.
No, I keep seeing these cyber trucks in my neighborhood, and I just, yeah,
That may be the
I
last
prefer not
thing
to.
we ever see. It would be a Cybertruck barreling towards you at 100 miles an hour. You just have to hope that it brakes before it hits you. Um, yeah, let's see. I'll mention I have a book review up on the Prospect. It's a review of a book by Bridget Reed called Little Bosses Everywhere. It's about MLMs and how they've influenced American culture and specifically right-wing politics. And you will not be surprised to learn that Donald Trump was involved in the MLM scam earlier in his career. But anyway, we're out of time now. Thanks for coming on the show, Whitney.
Thanks,
Um,
Ryan. It was great.
thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat